Now, should I rename this really quickly? Have it just called Aditi webinar.
Okay, that's totally fine.
Okay.
I have had more compromising titles. I haven't been a PhD. Like I have had like final draft 2 final. Like
Yeah. All right. Okay. Can you see my screen?
what you could do is do full screen. Or go to the bottom left corner and there's a chalice button, like looks like a cup. So if you can,
Is that better?
you know what?
Are you seeing the screen?
Do you see where it says notes, like bottom right hand? Yeah, and then there is like this little chalice, like a cup. So click on that.
I'm sorry. Tell me again. What am I clicking on?
Do you see notes, comments, bottom right hand corner on your slide?
Yes.
Yeah, so just click on that little chalice thing, like a cup thing. Does anybody know a keyboard shortcut?
Slideshow.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Can you go to that?
So you're able to see that now, right?
Yep, I can.
Okay.
I want to make sure that we're starting on time, folks. Hi. Usually I say hello to everybody. I will just say hi to everybody really quickly. Dimple, Jaya, Kabil, Kendall. Is it Kendall Jenner? Okay. Krupal, Linda, Lokesh, everybody, welcome. Folks, today I'm gonna keep my banter with you a little short because we have Evan Law, who has a hard stop at 12:15 p.m. Eastern, and he has a amazing information to be shared with you. So I don't want to keep you away from him. So Evan, if you can go to that slide where I can give a brief overview of who you are to our gathered folks here. I am excited to have Evan Law. I don't know if his last name was a deliberate choice for him to work in law, but I'm sure glad that he does. The reason why I specifically requested Evan to come to this webinar from the law firm he works with is because of what you see in your slide. That is, he has worked inside USCIS, in the AAO office, Administrative Appeals Office. He has adjudicated EB1, EB2, and EB3 cases. So he has the eyes of a USCIS officer. So there are things that we approach as an EB1 recipient. There are ways in which the immigration attorneys will write your cases, but it's a completely different mindset that you need to practice when you have to see the world through the USCIS officer's eyes. And I wanted you to get a taste of that so that you can reverse engineer this process and maximize your chances of EB1 success. So with that, thank you so much, Evan, for giving us an hour of your day today. And I cannot wait for people to get to know more about you and also the Pirates of the Caribbean example that you're about to share with us.
Sounds good. Well, this is one of my favorite movies of all time as well. So I would have loved to show more excerpts of the movie, but we'll go through some of the slides that we have. So overall, we're talking about the EB1A extraordinary ability visas. There's kind of themes throughout that officers look at. They're looking at the claims that you're making, the evidence that you're providing, and they want to see that there's a consistency throughout that. So many of you probably know the requirements of EB1A cases. So you have to first show that you meet at least 3 criteria. And so the officer starts with that, but they have these underlying themes in the back of their mind as well, which is has the person shown that they've risen to the very top of their field, and do they have sustained a claim or the recognition in the industry that we would expect to see in these case types. Oftentimes officers do it slightly different, but at the end of the day, they're still, a human being that's reviewing your documentation. Oftentimes I tell clients they're looking at, okay, as they go through this, they're looking at, well, what impresses them? So essentially your job is to tell the compelling story about your career, about the things you've accomplished, with the supporting evidence that convinces them that you meet the necessary qualifications. So throughout this, there are 3 responses the officer can likely give. They can pause at some point. They might read something and say, I'm not sure this checks out. I'm not really seeing where they're going. There might give you an eye roll. Maybe the language is kind of this hyperbole almost, or it's just something that may not be connected well with the evidence. Then the last one, this is where we want the officer to get to, is a nod, where they're saying, okay, yes, this checks out. The evidence supports this. So a few examples. Pause language could be language like this. The person is featured in Forbes. It's kind of name dropping. Obviously, people have heard of Forbes. We know it's highly reputable, but it's really not enough. Recipient of a particular award, they're recognized in AI. These are kind of moments where the officer says, okay, let me check this out further. Then you have the eye roll types of things, language like this person is a world-renowned leader in innovation. These kind of general statements, they just, they're kind of flashy, but they don't connect the dots. Multi-award winning visionary, same thing. Top innovator, that you get the idea. So the best examples are ones like in this third column. Profiled by Forbes Innovation Issue, has 6 million plus readers. It's connecting the outstanding achievements with the evidence that supports what we need to show. Winner of an IEEE Early Career Award, same type of thing. You're showing how impressive that is. Similar with this statement about the scholarly articles in a highly ranked journal. So those are some examples of how officers can look through this. So as Aditi mentioned, we're going to be going through the example of Jack Sparrow. And at the beginning of this movie, I mean, there's so many classic scenes. There's him standing on the top of this mast, just looking like he's on top of the world. And then it comes down to, you're seeing, actually the mast he's standing on is, nearly at the bottom of the port. So he arrives in the port. He doesn't have a ship. He has no crew. The locals and officers, they don't really view him as a highly renowned pirate. His reputation is basically all talk. And so at the end of the movie, we see that he comes out ahead and he ends up getting the black pearl that he wanted. And so, his accomplishments are seen throughout the movie. But at first, it's kind of this rocky start. So officers oftentimes start by just going through the case and seeing kind of the overview of everything. What is the claimed field? What criteria is the person claiming to meet? How many of them? What does the quality of the evidence look like? And you can kind of see that quickly from looking through the draft of the cover letter from the attorney, or even just flipping through and seeing bits and pieces of the evidence. So in this case with Jack Sparrow, we're going to talk about how the evidence stacks up. There's this scene with Captain Norrington where he basically comes in contact with Jack Sparrow, and he says, well, look, you have a gun that has no powder. He pulls out his sword and he says, and I half expected it to be made of wood, right? And then he says, you are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of. Well, so part of this goes to what is the field and how is it defined? So one of the first tips we would give is make sure that your field is clearly defined. If Jack Sparrow was applying for this visa type and the presentation was that he's a pirate, he's a world-renowned pirate, would that one really be specific enough to help demonstrate that he qualifies? But if you focus on his specialty in commandeering ships, then this starts to make sense with the evidence that's provided. He could focus on the maritime strategy, the naval tactics, the things that he does that are outstanding. I'll just say, if you haven't seen the movie, go watch it. You should probably watch it again. It's just such a classic. But this next slide shows this is the look of Captain Jack Sparrow after he and Will sail away with the interceptor. And that's when this other officer says, that's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen. So here we have an example of him commandeering a ship in a very unique way. It was brilliant. Another tip, with this case type, there's this underlying word, a claim. And a claim has not been defined in the regulations, but the tip we would give is fame isn't the same as a claim. So you could make a point here that, you providing evidence that you have 5,000 followers on LinkedIn and things like that. Well, that shows that, that you are essentially having this fame in a way, but it's not the same. So we want to make sure that you're presenting your professional recognition. It's not enough that people have just heard of you, like Captain Jack Sparrow says, but how and where your recognition appears. So here's Elizabeth saying, are you the pirate I've read about or not? We don't know, obviously, where she's read about him, but this kind of goes into why I think Jack Sparrow would make a good claim for the Extraordinary Ability Visa. This is one of the criteria, published material about you, right? So the next tip I would say is stay in the present. Officers have some unique language. Sometimes I say this to clients, is it can be triggering language. If you talk too much about what you're going to achieve in the future. Usually this comes into play with support letters. So here Elizabeth is saying, he's going to be positively the most fearsome pirate in the Spanish Main. And then he says, no, the entire world, right? So the reality check is we need to focus on what you've already accomplished. USCIS has this language that goes to that to say, you need to demonstrate, you've already risen to the top of your field, not just focusing on these other things you're going to do in your career. Usually that will come to play in support letters toward the end. Oftentimes that's when people writing these letters will include details about what they will do in the future and things. So, there is an aspect of the EB1 case that does hit on this, in that you need to show how your efforts will impact and be a positive benefit to the country, but that's really not a huge part of this case study. So here's an example of how an officer would read this case. So the claims of he's a world famous pirate, or he's renowned for commandeering ships, or the future legend of the Spanish Main, those really are not sufficient. The first one, it's kind of just a vague claim of reputation. But the second one, the evidence of him capturing the interceptor and ultimately the Black Pearl, that's where the officer is going to nod and say, yes, okay, I see that, right? The future legend of the Spanish Main, that's just unproven, so the officer will pause on that. They may issue a request for evidence, asking for details of that. But again, they would probably put in the language that says, you need to show that he's already shown that he's a legend of the Spanish Main, right? So it's not just about storytelling flair, it's about how your evidence aligns with the claims that you're making, right? Okay, so here are the ways Jack Sparrow can teach us, the things he can teach us about this case type. So at the beginning, as I said, there's really a doubt as far as the evidence. So you really want to come out strong. Presenting your strongest evidence first can oftentimes be very important. But then also you build this up by showing the evidence of this. It's a lower level, but in the movie there's a part where they do steal two like canoes that help them get out to eventually take the interceptor. So he has this skill of commandeering ships. Then the recognition, you really want to show the results. The more you can demonstrate through your evidence, the better that is, just by having flowery language, very impressive language. You really want the evidence to match exactly what you're saying. And so ultimately, this is proven through the evidence. When I was at the AAO, after a while, I just would go straight to the evidence. I wouldn't spend a lot of time reading the briefs that the attorneys spent all that time putting together. And not always, but you really want to have both. And I would say sometimes I just felt like the things that were written were a little too much hyperbole. But then again, when I saw cover letters that really connected the evidence with the language, those were much more helpful. Okay, so here is a real client example, and we can talk about how these apply in different settings. So here's an example of an AI automation expert. So this is someone who's a specialist in cloud database administration, AI-driven automation, and cybersecurity. So there's several ways to address the field there. Overall, we want to make sure that there's just this consistency throughout. So going back to the example of Jack Sparrow, if we had a bunch of evidence submitted where we showed just how incredible he is as a swordsman, well, that, he does have, he's very skilled there, but it doesn't connect with the field that we're going for. Okay, so this person has 14 peer-reviewed publications, presentations, and top-rated conferences, and they've led infrastructure projects across several important areas. So one criterion this is actually a very difficult criterion to meet, but I wanted to talk about it because sometimes it's important to understand where the limitations are and perhaps maybe where it's better to talk about this in the final merits analysis. So what the language says is that you have to show that you've made original contributions of major significance in the field. So USCIS looks for how have your innovations impacted the field? What evidence is there that others are using those innovations? And for example, in this case, our applicant claims they've developed a patent-pending AI automation system. It's transforming financial data processing. So we want to see how that is now being implemented and used by others in the field. So from the officer's point of view, they're looking at, okay, well, what makes this innovation unique? What makes it impactful? A patent alone, oftentimes USCIS uses the language to say a patent alone shows the originality. That's what you're trying to protect. But USCIS wants to see, well, how is it being implemented? How influential is it in the field? And at times I do feel like USCIS goes a bit far on this criterion. So this can be a really important conversation with your attorney as you prepare these cases, whether you want to go all in trying to meet that criterion. If you have others that you meet, oftentimes I recommend that we move that to the final merits analysis because it still talks about these very influential things that you've done, but sometimes that can put you in a stronger position. Okay, so
Actually,
going
तुम्हारे
through
लिए ना
the,
इसमें रखे हुए थे विराट हाँ गया
Yeah, go
सारे
ahead.
इसलिए वो
Second. I'm gonna put Rashmi on it.
Oh, sorry. So I was just getting a little bit of a
Yeah.
language in the background.
Yeah.
So I couldn't really hear that. Did someone ask a question?
Oh, somebody did not know that their mic was unmuted. I muted
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so evaluating the evidence. So this person, the claim is they've developed a new AI automation system. So then we want to look at, okay, what's the supporting evidence? The patent filing, we want to see the citations in professional publications. And so that allows the officer to nod and say, okay, yes, this is established, let's move on. They can look at also they've transformed financial data workflows from the language they're seeing, perhaps in support letters. And then we see that, yes, this is being used by 3 fintech firms. So that, again, helps to show the impact. On the other hand, a statement like you've revolutionized global AI practices, that alone without any evidence, that's where the officer is going to have kind of this eye roll moment. Okay, so, going back to Captain Jack Sparrow at the very beginning, and this is, I mean, with anything with character development through a movie, you have these things that the character is trying to overcome. In your case, when you're presenting these cases, you're getting to the point where you're just jumping right in and showing what are the highlights, what are the most prominent aspects of your case. And so I bring this up because sometimes attorneys or clients feel like they need to argue everything. So if you've won 4 awards, for example, and 2 of them you're really not as thrilled with, you don't find them to be as compelling, it's probably best to just leave those 2 out. Any of the weak parts of your evidence is going to be like this Jack Sparrow moment where they're saying, you don't have this, you don't have this, what you want to do is be presenting your case so that every aspect of the evidence you present is sufficient to meet the requirements. Again, as the officers go through this, they're first doing almost like a checklist approach where they're looking through the criteria. Do you meet 3 out of these 10? And even the sub issues for each of the criteria. And then they get to that final merits analysis where they say, okay, now we're looking in the totality. How does the evidence show that you've risen to the top of your field? And you don't want the officer looking at the weakest aspects of your evidence in that moment to say, well, you've submitted this and this, but we see these issues with them. Instead, you want them to be looking at a level of the evidence and the quality of it. That's one of the ways that this second aspect of these adjudications is called. It's looking, the final merits determination is essentially looking at the quality of the evidence, as Kazarian came with that. Kazarian is the case that lays out this framework for the EB2, for the EB1 extraordinary ability cases. So in essence, you get to the end of the movie with Jack Sparrow, and he sails away with the Black Pearl. He's met his accomplishment. That is the biggest piece of evidence that he has. And so if I were presenting the case for Jack Sparrow, I would focus on these 2 components of what he did to take the interceptor, as well as leading a crew to eventually get his objective, which is the Black Pearl. So I encourage you to go watch the movie again, or for the first time if you haven't seen it. Hopefully we haven't taken your viewpoint down that you are now going to think about extraordinary ability visas every time you see this movie, but it's a classic movie. So anyway, that was the gist of what I've got, and so we can turn the time over to you all for questions that you have, and anything that wasn't clear, I'd be happy to clarify.
Folks, we're gonna go into Q&A round. But before anything, as a former professor, I recognize the amount of effort that it takes to not only create a 20-minute talk, but also to create it in a way which is compelling, where you draw parallels between 2 things that are not even related to each other. So can we please have a round of applause for Evan's effort in making the presentation as accessible to us as possible? Simplicity is the master, like that's the peak of expertise, right? So when you know that somebody has simplified something that is extremely complex and not to lawyers, but very boring, to something that is this interesting, a lot of work has gone into it.
Well, thank you. You all are very kind.
Yes. Okay, folks, we are going to go into Q&A. I don't know where I'm getting some feedback from that voice. Folks, can you mute yourself if you haven't? Or is it from Evan? Whoopsie.
I don't know. Is it on mine?
Yeah, no, I think it's gone now. Yeah. All right, folks, we are going to go into Q&A mode. Number 1 is you need to keep your questions to 1 per person. And please center your questions around how a USCIS officer is reading your case, not so much about the meats and potatoes of your case. because that's where it goes into consultation mode, and we don't, this is a public seminar, we are not going to do that here. So one question per person, and keep it to, how does a USCIS officer read an EB1 case? All right, Ashwin, go for it.
Hello, hi Aditi, and hi Evan. Thank you so much for walking all of us through that information. Really very insightful. I had quick small two questions. One is that regarding judging, if you have judged a competition, and how does USCIS basically look at the quality of that competition that you have judged? And what all evidence can we bring besides, a judging certificate to make our case stronger? And another thing, Aditi, you mentioned in your mail that, there is a free case giveaway from Manifest. So how is that going to work? If you can clarify that, please.
I'll answer the second question. The second question is, if you have registered, I put that link, like the case giveaway link. I think Shivani is in the room. So Shivani, if you want to drop that in the chat, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
I'll drop it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the first question, please, folks, one question per person. Evan, judging evidence and claims.
Yeah, sounds great. So, it's a very good question. I will say there are certain categories that really just are not as impressive to the officers in general, and judging is one of those. Unfortunately, oftentimes I put awards, judging, and membership kind of in the lower tier of evidence that can be presented. And so you are right in that you kind of are climbing uphill in a way with this, because of the things that you need to meet for judging. It can be easily met. And so you have two things you need to be looking at. One is evidence that you've established the judging, and then when you get to the final merits, how impressive was that judging? Ideally, your case can have 4 or 5 criteria so that you can rely on those other criteria more in the judging capacities. But what I would do is I would focus on presenting the judging from the items, the aspects that are most impressive to you. So for example, if you've judged maybe 10 hackathons or something, I would focus on discussing the top 2 or 3, and especially one where maybe you gave a presentation or something like that. But you can include details about all of them, but then when you get to the final merits analysis, I would focus on the 2 most prominent. So it is challenging to know how, what evidence you can provide. I would focus on, any documentation that you have that shows how many people are attending this, in what area is it in. There's this internationally renowned aspect of this, or nationally known. And so, if there's a prominent hackathon taking place in San Francisco or something, show some highlights of that. But it is a difficult part. So in essence, nobody usually wins just on having you can't win just by having judging alone. But I would say just put forward the best evidence you can, and then also focus in the final merits on other aspects that make your case very strong.
Awesome. Shrikant?
Yeah, Mike, thank you, Evan. Thanks for giving the time, and thanks, Aditi. This is really insightful. So I have a two-faced question. One is around the evidence. So what happens other than the certificates or anything, we need to provide the tail end, or, completely the whole loop of the evidence for a given activity. But sometimes what happens is the emails we use for the corporate, they don't keep the trail, and they have the, and they have a tail retention policy, and every 4 or 5 years they clear the emails. So what happens if you just have the certificate, but not the whole, loop of the, communication chain that happened around that activity?
So good question. What I would say is this is where support letters can come into play and really help things in terms of, oftentimes there are aspects of of a case that are confidential even, and that you're not able to provide the emails that demonstrate things, or perhaps, you know, a manager has spoken very highly of you in like a performance review, but you're not allowed to share that, or something because of confidentiality concerns. Well, those are aspects that you can bring out through the support letters. You can have these people write about the details of what makes this so impressive. And so a lot of this is in you building upon evidence. Some of the evidence is presented just to show that you've accomplished something, just to show that you did do the judging. It could be even an email thanking you for having done the review. That can be helpful. Sometimes USCIS issues an RFE saying, okay, we see that you were invited to review, but we're not seeing that you actually completed the review. And so what you want to be doing is just connecting the dots of aspects of the evidence that show, yes, this was done, was you know, these were the contributions from this. And then, you know, whatever you can provide objectively that helps establish that. Ultimately, we want to be seeing what else can you provide that shows how prominent this was. And so, you know, every one of these cases, they're unique with you know, everyone has their own unique aspects to their career, but basically what I would say is, you know, just try to connect the dots as well as you can. And ultimately, if there's not more evidence you can provide, that's fine. You're it's a constraint that you have. And this is one thing that I wish more USCIS officers understood, is just how difficult it is to obtain this documentation. But I would say just do the best that you can to present as much as you can and connect the dots in several different ways.
I don't know how much you'll agree to this, Evan, but given that you have, I don't know, again, I'm getting some feedback. Where am I getting that feedback from? Yeah, so the emoji that I draw is, again, people, can you hear that feedback?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know why. Maybe if I mute Evan, maybe. Evan, the issue is the mic. Oh, but I don't know. I'll just mute you so that I can say, and then you can unmute yourself and say it. But the way, because you gave the Pirates of the Caribbean example, the thing that I tell folks to think about when you're saying connect the dots is to think like you're watching a detective story, that the crime has happened and now the detective is going to all these evidences and try to connect the dot and create that picture of the moment that it happened. Would you say that's a good way to think about and approach this connect the dots strategy? You can unmute yourself, Evan.
Yes, and I apologize about the audio issue. So I wonder if, just really quickly, if I can switch over to this. Does that make anything better?
If I say something, does it show up as a feedback? No.
Is it any better, or is it about
No,
the same?
I don't think. Yeah, now it's good. Yeah. Yeah. So does that detective show approach, thinking of yourself as a detective, help?
Yes, that's excellent. And that's really what the officer is doing, is they're verifying the claims that are made. Just like a detective would say, okay, I'm hearing this testimony from one person, now I'm going to go interview someone else and say, what are they saying about you? What are they saying about the circumstances? And so they're looking at these threads of, okay, that person said this one thing, this other person said the same thing, and so it's starting to come into play. So yeah, I think that's a perfect example.
I will drop, because I understand everything to the world of memes. I will drop a meme in the comments so that it makes you understand it more, what Evan is trying to say about connecting the dots. But in that meantime, Lakshmana, go for it. Ask one question to Evan.
Sure. Thank you so much, Evan, for this is really valuable, and thanks for setting up this one, Aditi. I have one question just to on the final minutes of sustained acclaim. From the USCIS officer perspective, how many years of sustained acclaim being reviewed? I would like to know, just in terms of, is it the length of the or the duration of the sustained acclaim? That's it. Thank you.
Let me see if I understand your question a little bit better. Are you asking how long they're looking for?
How
for a
Yeah.
period of time
has
of the
the
sustained claim.
sustain, yeah, how sustained does this sustenance have to be?
And I'll start by saying when I worked for the AAO, often at that point, it needed to be much longer than it is now. So USCIS has made some good improvements on this. So for example, when I worked for the government, people that had just finished a PhD program and they were kind of in the early stages of that next chapter for them, even though they been in the field for 10 or 12 or 15 years, oftentimes officers would say, they're still at kind of these early stages in this career path, so we don't feel like that's sustained a claim. But USCIS has come out and said, no, people even early on in their careers can show sustained a claim if the documentation satisfies us over a period of time. So generally, I like to see at least 3 years of recognition, aspects of recognition that I can point to. Obviously, the more, the better. 2 years of a high level of recognition that's where you start to, uh, have more challenges with the sustained acclaim aspect of it. So sometimes when I meet with clients as well, we talk about portfolio building in terms of things that they can do to continue to network and build up their reputation in the industry more. But sometimes I reference it in terms of portfolio digging, which is we're digging for the things that you've done in your career earlier on that maybe you don't think are that impressive, but they still show a high level of recognition, where there's several professors that knew about some work you had done years ago, that type of a thing. And so the more you can look at this as, this kind of underlying theme of how highly recognized you are in the field, the better. But it's such a subjective component to this that it's really hard to say. It's hard to pinpoint exactly how every officer is going to view it as well. You'll see one other thing quickly on this as well, because when you look at the regulations, the way they're written is that meeting 3 out of the 10 criteria. Well, those criteria go toward showing sustained a claim. But when you look at the criteria, they do that in different ways. For example, a high salary. Well, that shows your recognition in the field in a different way. Your employer is recognizing the work that you've done by paying you very well. Something like scholarly articles, well, that goes to a particular audience, right? And so oftentimes I try to remind officers that, don't just focus on the term sustained acclaim like in a vacuum. Don't disregard the criteria that we've already been establishing that go towards acclaim. But in essence, you also want to do as much as you can to demonstrate that you have this level of recognition that carries on over a good period of time.
This is a question that I want to ask because you have a dual role as a USCIS officer, former USCIS officer and a lawyer. You said that you're gonna remind the USCIS officer that, hey, don't take sustained acclaim at face value, understand how it is manifests, no pun intended. But how do you do that within the bounds of law? What is the legalese that you might use to impress this fact on the USCIS officer?
Right. One of the ways I do that is I point them right to the regulation that talks about initial evidence, and this is actually where AB 1A cases have become more difficult, is because the regulations use the word initial evidence. Comparatively to like the 01 visa that has very similar requirements, it doesn't have that language. And for the 01, if you meet 3 out of the 8 requirements, you're approved. With this one, a quick reading of the regulation would have you think, okay, if I meet 3 out of the 10 requirements, I should be approved as well. But that's where the litigation happened, and Kazarian said, okay, well, no, there's this term initial language here, so we recognize this as you first have to meet these initial requirements, and then the officer will view the quality of it to make sure it meets these standards. And so what I do is I focus on, there's really 3 components here when you get to the final merits. You can show that the given evidence you've submitted goes towards showing that you've risen to the very top of your field. That's in section, 204.5 H2, if you want to read about it. That's the definition of extraordinary ability. Or this other aspect of where the criteria come in there's two phrases that get used, and I put this in the earlier slide, but there's sustained a claim, and then the next phrase after that is, and evidence showing that your achievements have been recognized in the field. And so for the very big items, the scholarly articles, the presentations at prominent conferences, things like that, I want to include that with language saying, see, this shows the sustained claim. If you have internal recognition from supervisors or maybe an employee of the year award, that goes to your achievements being recognized in the field. And so oftentimes I just really focus back on each of those three components from the regulations and tie the evidence to those, and that should get you through the final merits analysis. Hopefully that makes sense.
Krupa.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you, Ivan, for your time. I'm following your third webinar in last 4 days. So the question is on the evidence again for the original contribution. Let's say person work on the product which is commercialized, but there are no direct evidence that, okay, company A got approval, but how the person work on that, there are no direct evidence. So how we can present the better acceptable evidence by the USCIS?
Question. So this is again one reason why I have kind of this love-hate relationship with the original contributions language. I think I would define it more as a hate relationship, because it's just I feel like USCIS has taken it too far. For example, sometimes they use language saying you haven't shown this is major significance to the field, while the regulation says major significance in the field, right? And so I feel like they go too far when they're saying, show this widespread, documentation that this has been implemented, in a wide scale throughout the industry. So what I would say is this, in instances where you're having difficulty demonstrating just how pivotal the role was that you performed and why that has played such a prominent role in the commercialization that followed, or how it was implemented in the field. You want to try to connect those as much as you can from support letters that discuss what your contributions were, evidence showing how that is being utilized in the field, the commercialization aspect of it. There's never going to be a complete, example of saying, you were the only, usually it doesn't come out that you say, you can pinpoint evidence that shows I was the only one that that played a role here. This is what I did to get it to the market, and now it has been utilized. And here are the hundreds of companies that I have letters from all these people saying we utilize this, and we know it was this person who did. That's just not realistic. It's not what the officers need. But that's where the challenge comes in, is oftentimes these officers don't think of, well, what is realistically the way that I'd like to see this demonstrated. And so you'll make another point here with this. For example, if you can show how impactful this contribution was for your company as well, and to show the ways that it has been utilized by others, you can actually focus more on the critical role that you performed for that company. And that's when I say you talk about the original contributions in the final merits analysis. In other words, you basically say, I'm not going to fight with USCIS on this incredibly high standard that they have. I know what my contributions were. Maybe I'm not getting the full credit for what that is and how widely it's being implemented. But if you pivot toward focusing on the critical role, and then you talk about the original contributions in the final merits, and oftentimes I'll do that in a way which I just say, as far as original contributions, here in the final merits analysis only, we're talking about these points or something, just to remind the officer that they don't need to go back to adjudicate the criteria. So in other words, I'm basically saying my preference in all reality is to pivot towards the final merits analysis in most cases. But it's a strategy that I use. It's not necessarily needed in all cases. I will say there's another part of that regulation that talks about the scholarly contributions as well. And so if on top of the thing that you've done, perhaps developing a patent or whatever the innovation is, if there's also scholarly articles that support that, we want you to focus on that as well. So hopefully that answers that. If you have a follow-up question, just let me know.
Yeah, no, this is helpful. Thank you.
Prashant? Good.
Yes. Hi, Aditi. Thank you and you, Yuan, for the opportunity for this webinar. So I do have a quick question about the receipt of nationally, internationally recognized prizes and awards and membership criteria. So my field is unique field, like that is not regular mechanical engineering or something like that. So I'm falling under the paper and printing science. And I got the during my academia, I got for my research fellowship and the some recognized awards from the industry. That is like a print, for example, printing industry of America. That is awarded the one of the prestigious fellowship. So how I can show that evidences and that evidences will be helpful to consider this criteria, and along with that fellowship and membership, so they offer the membership also.
Okay, so good question. I'll make a comment briefly about memberships here, just so I can get that out of the way. But one of the reasons why the memberships is a difficult one to meet is there's just several components. You have to show that you are part of a membership, and it's because of your outstanding achievements in the field, and you show that it was judged by or decided by nationally or internationally renowned experts. And so it can be difficult to show all of those. But again, that might be something that's very valuable to include in the final merits analysis if you meet several other criteria. So with the awards, it has to be, the language says lesser nationally or internationally recognized awards. So, they don't have to be, this is incredibly impressive awards like the Oscars. I mean, those are like the big awards. Again, I know that's not in your field, but what I'm saying is the officers are used to the fact that these are lower level awards, but there does have to be that national, recognition to them. So what I would suggest is, if anything you can provide that shows what the basis for the awards are, how many people applied for the awards or were considered for the award. Can you get a letter from anybody who was on a committee that helped you obtain those? So was there, how significant was the grant you received, if that was part of it? But again, one of the challenges you have here is you're not only trying to meet the criteria, but you're also trying to demonstrate that this evidence is strong, so that when they get to the final merits analysis, they can say they can basically point to, oh wow, this shows, how the quality of this evidence shows that you have these met these underlying requirements, that you've risen to the top of your field, that you have this acclaim. So if you only have 2 awards and you're finding difficulty just showing, how many people were considered for them, how highly published was it, what were there articles published about it, what was the media that was published in, that type of a thing. If you're having a hard time showing that, I would focus on that almost in the final merits as well.
Okay, thank you so much. So yeah,
We have on Prashant. I did host a poll on LinkedIn very recently on USCIS officers. This is like a contrarian take, but USCIS officers not being strict enough, because I read a petition where Nobel Award was granted by the USCIS officer. And then I ran it by another ex-USCIS officer, like, if you were the USCIS officer, how would you have assessed this? So this is her take on it, and a lot of the things that Evan just talked about, she's echoing. So if that helps you clear your mindset about how to approach awards, I hope that helps. Lokesh.
Hey, Thanks, Evan, and thanks, Aditi, for facilitating this. I have a question. So when you submit a case to USCIS, will the USCIS officer check only what we gave them, like what the evidence we provide, or they go online and reach out to the people who have written letters for us? And how much time does a typical EB1 case get the eyes of an officer?
The last part was how much time does the officer spend on it? Is that right?
On a
Yeah.
case?
How deep does the USCIS officer go in investigating you?
Mhm. Okay, so we have a couple of things that I'll say on this. We kind of have two perspectives that manifest. We have an attorney that just joined our firm that used to train EB1 officers recently at the Texas Service Center, and it has some really unique insights on the timing things. And I'll give you my insights from when I was at the AAO as well, because we took a deeper dive into these cases. And so from this attorney, the perspective is this: that generally officers are trying to finalize these cases in about 3 hours or so. And yes, they can go online and look for things, and oftentimes we do. So now I'm pivoting to when I was at the AAO. Yes, I would go to Google. We would look at the Google Scholar page. If someone has published scholarly articles, things like that, we'll go to their LinkedIn profile. The thing is, it's hard to say to what lengths the officer will look at something. Sometimes I remember looking at, okay, wait a minute, the language this person is using in the support letter, it doesn't really add up. I'm just really not getting the sense that this is written by the person that I reference here. And so I would go to, a profile about the person who wrote that award. And so the officers can do that type of thing. They're focusing most heavily on the evidence you've provided, but they can verify things as well online. Sometimes that can be problematic, and if you can push back on that if they raise some issues in RFEs, but generally they won't do that. They won't print out something and say, listen, you pulled this off of the website, can you explain this? Right, but you want to make sure that what you're submitting, it has an authenticity to it and is accurate. So as to the timing, what I would say is just these are, every case type can take quite a lot of time just to go through the evidence. So the more you can help the officer by pointing them to certain aspects of the case, or putting in bold the things that you really want to jump out at them. You may think it doesn't look all that professional, or maybe there's too much bold everywhere. I mean, you don't want to go overboard, but the more you can do to help the officer pinpoint and connect the dots with your evidence, rather than just kind of hoping that they go through all the evidence and everything jumps out that needs to jump out, that can really help your chances by helping this be a more efficient process for them. Hopefully that answers the question.
You mentioned 3 hours, Evan, but what is your thought on folks saying that it takes 30 minutes for an officer to, or because it's like a factory line, right? Like efficiency is number one. So really
That's a
have
great-
3 hours?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I see, I was under the viewpoint that it was a more limited number on this. So the officers are judged by the number of cases that they complete.
Mhm.
And so for example, when I was at the AAO, we had to finish 10 cases a month. I mean, that sounds like but like I said, we went to a deeper level through the appeal as well. And, but with the officers, especially when you look at premium processing, they have to complete that review within 15 business days. And so, yeah, it's very limited on their time. And so it's hard to say exactly how long it would take. You would compare this almost to like bar exam essays sometimes. I mean, not everyone has that experience, but essays for the bar exam, they give you a certain period of time, but you can go over on one essay and then but then you realize, oh, I've got a much shorter period of time for this. So sometimes they may spend less time on a given case during the day because they maybe spent too much time on another case. So it's hard to see even when I review EB1 cases that other attorneys put together. And sometimes those take a lot longer than I thought as well. So it's really hard to say how long they're being given, and how long they're spending on this. But I wouldn't focus too much on that, because that's outside of your control. What is inside your control is how well am I presenting my case so that the officers aren't going to take issue with something. If you're presenting something that for example, the evidence isn't really clear that you won the award versus just being nominated for the award, just come out and say you were nominated for the award. Otherwise, the officer could take 45 minutes trying to figure out, well, did they actually win the award? And if at the end of the day they find out, okay, they were just nominated, that makes the officer frustrated. So that they're like, man, I wish I would have known this right off the bat, right? They've got to get this completed. It's not like these officers are just completely in this negative world where they're just saying, I just want to deny as many of these as I can. These are people that still want to go through and make a good assessment of the evidence you've provided. But the more you can help them, I would say the better position you'll be in.
Yeah. The other thing that we I have gone to enough of these USCIS ex-officer led events to realize what the world looks like from their end. In my world, I am only doing cloud infrastructure, but this USCIS officer who has to go through 8 cases, 9 a.m. he's probably reading a golfer, 11 a.m. they're reading cloud infrastructure, 12 p.m. they're reading a painter. So like the level of context switching and deep dive they have to go through each field and then apply the law and then pass and then match their goals, that's a lot. So it's a simple statement which Evan says that make it easier for the officer. That should be our North Star, that make it as easy for the USCIS officer to go through your case, because it's a lot that's going through their mind.
Yeah, great points.
Herschel.
Lily, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for the presentation, Evan. My question is regarding, I'm given like kind of like conflicting views on this. So, as someone who has like very few research papers which were published very recently, I was told that since they are published in some decent enough conferences, you can focus on their future impact. Like you can get like good citations, like figure out that this particular conference has on an average like some like maybe 10 citations per paper or something. You can write that on your supporting letter. But you just mentioned that it's better to focus on what you already achieved, not focus on what you can achieve. So what do you recommend for people who have like few published papers and decent conferences with minimum citations?
Yeah, great question. And this comes up quite a bit. And what I would suggest is you still need to focus on what you've already accomplished. And so this can be done in a way where you're, let's say, in this scenario, the way I would present this is I would focus on the content that you've provided and how that alone just shows that you've risen to the top of your field, that you're able to discuss this type of material, and then to have supporting letters that talk about just how that demonstrates you're an expert in the field. The other thing I would say, when you talk about the fact that something is likely to have a lot of citations in the future and that type of a thing, we still don't want to focus on that future impact that it's going to have, but there are components that you can bring in that might be helpful. For example, you could talk about the journal that it's published in is one that typically does get a high level of citations, or it has a high impact factor of the journal, that type of thing. The other thing I would say is, depending on the field, oftentimes engineers have, engineers have a lower publication rate and a lower citation rate, obviously, than someone who's a dedicated full-time researcher, right? And so oftentimes I will also remind USCIS officers, this is not a fundamental component of your your work, but this extra publication that you've done, these things, even if in supporting letters or your personal statements, you can describe how you're passionate about these things, and you've published these materials outside of the normal aspects of your work. I mean, there's oftentimes just, I think, a few reminders that we can give to officers to just say, look at how still incredible this is to get published in this journal, or to have these these aspects of the evidence. It's tricky because you also don't want to say, disregard the fact that I don't have 30 publications and hundreds of citations like the last person, because you also don't want to put negative thoughts in their mind, right? But by focusing on what the strengths are in each of these, that's what I would suggest. Just don't use language that's so forward looking that I'm confident in a year or so I'm going to have, that this will continue to be cited and things like that. Hopefully that answers your question.
There is a certain element in the EB1 petition where you have to articulate about your continued plans of working in the field. Could you repurpose some of this potential impact in that area?
Yeah, what I would suggest in that is that this is why that language USCIS uses is so odd in all reality, because they're using part of the requirements are that show that you're going to have an ongoing impact. And so, I mean, it's a good question. Why can't we present evidence of that? It seems like it would go very much to this aspect of the case showing that you're going to have a positive impact. But what the difference is because that's kind of a final aspect of the case after you've already met the criteria you need and shown the sustained claim. And so we don't want to be addressing that aspect of it in the criterion stage or the final merits. So you can, I mean, what I would suggest is really just that you keep your personal statement toward the general requirements that you need to show that you're going to continue working in the field, and then establish the ways that you're making a positive contribution, and that's going to continue because you're continuing to work in the field. So I wouldn't necessarily focus on like future citations that you think will come from your work and aspects of like that. Yeah, but in essence, I mean, the personal statement is this moment where you can give a personalized touch to this to help the officers just understand just what it means to you to have accomplished these things. And so I would definitely, in that personal statement, I would focus on things that you're highlighting in the brief. If you're talking about your most prominent achievements in that personal statement, but then the evidence you've submitted really doesn't support that, that's a problem as well. And this is why I bring up this word of consistency throughout. You really want everything to be consistent from the field, from your personal statement, from the evidence that you're supporting, and the letters of recommendation that you're submitting.
Got it. I don't know, but it was there in one of your slides where you're like, your goal is to not amaze the USCIS officer, your goal is to align the USCIS officer, that everything adds up to this crescendo of you being extraordinary in your field of endeavor.
Yeah, if I can just add one part to that, because there is a component of, I guess what I would say to just put a little more of a point on that is you really don't want to just have the language that you're using being what's amazing to you. But there is this component of the officers essentially asking, well, impress me. So and the evidence that you submit has an impact on, well, how impressive is that? When I would go to my supervisor, they would be essentially asking me, well, how impressed are you by this or this or this? And so there is kind of this underlying component to it, but what we would say with that is just make sure that it's your documentation being aligned with the requirements. That's what becomes impressive because it's meeting exactly what you need.
The basis of impressing the USCIS officer has to be more substantive.
Mm.
Okay. Folks, we have to let Evan go at 12:15. So we are going to take as many questions as possible till before that time. Jitin.
Okay, thank you, Ivan and Aditi, for the session. My question is about original contribution of major significance. So suppose if one has a detailed, strong letter of recommendation and media about their work, like directly media for their work product at a previous employer, can that be considered as major significance for original contribution?
Great question. So generally, that won't be enough. The original contributions has such a high threshold, as I've indicated, that the officers really want to see a significant amount of this kind of substantive evidence showing not only do you have people talking about your accolades in support letters and the media that you might have about that as well. That those are very helpful. But they also want to see documentation showing, well, how are these things being utilized? So it's very difficult to talk about generally because there's so many varieties of this. Like you could have a prominent role in designing and implement, or designing a component to something that then gets manufactured and is now being utilized in, a number of different things in the industry. That can usually be shown by you showing, the patent that was obtained, that you were one of the inventors on the patent, and things like that. That's kind of the more substantive evidence I'm talking about. But when there are things like say, for example, someone in the business field, well, see, they're going to have a different way of going about this because it's really difficult to say, okay, as a thought leader, here are the exact ways that my influence has made an impact in the field. That's a much more challenging thing to develop. I would say, basically just having support letters and media recognition, that generally won't be enough, where the officers want to see something more that shows it's been implemented in the field. But this is also why I take issue with some of the ways that this is being addressed. So for example, when I was at the AAO, there was a case I worked on that I felt like this person met the original contributions criterion for this really incredible research that they had done. But it was at the early stages of being discussed. It hadn't really been implemented in the field. But in my view, it was major significance in the field because of what it opened up as far as research goes. So, but ultimately, I couldn't convince my supervisor of that, and so the case was denied ultimately. So, with this, that's why I say the original contributions. It's one that I wanted to focus on, bring up in this discussion, just because that one is, it can be a make or break it aspect of your case, but sometimes it makes more sense to address it in the final merits analysis. In your case, it sounds like that's what I would suggest is focusing on it in that final merits part.
Sanil.
Hi, Aditi and Evan. So it's regarding publication. So for how would you show the impact of an industry publication where you would not have much citations, or like something like Google Scholar or something like that? So how would you show an impact?
Yeah, good question. So the regulations that allow for these things to be published in professional journals. So just so we make sure I'm understanding this correctly, you're talking about scholarly articles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as an industry professional, Evan. So Sunil is not an academic, so he has published in a trade mag, but a trade mag does not track citations or adoption or building upon as explicitly as an academic journal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so the regulations allow for this to be published in professional journals or major trade publications. So when you look at the phrase trade publications, the officers are going to say, okay, provide evidence that this is a major trade publication. As far as the impact it has, this is where you want to look at, the documentation that just shows how widely read that is in the industry. As I talked about earlier, kind of the impact factor, the rankings of these journals that can show prominence as well. And this is where I take you back to the discussion I had about these three parts of or the three aspects of the final merits analysis. If you're having difficulty showing that, the reach, the acclaim that comes from this, pivot to talking about why this shows that you've risen to the top of your field, or that your achievements are, have been recognized in the field. The fact that it's published in a professional journal, that, it's an achievement that's recognized in the field, right? And so, again, comparing your work to the work of published researchers that just have a lot of publications, a lot of citations. That's why we just want to remind the officer that they don't need to be focused so much on the citation count or things like that. So it's a very difficult thing to do because because like I said earlier, you don't want to come out with kind of negative language that says, well, I don't have a ton of citations like I'd love to have. You don't want to say that, obviously, but what you can say is, I mean, even things like as an engineer, this publication and the topic that I've addressed here goes to this specific issue, and you talk more about that. Oftentimes, the more, as we brought up earlier, there's so many different topics that officers go through. So the more that you can describe and basically simplify what it is that you do and just how complex that is, a lot of what you can do in showing that you've risen to the top of your field is just establishing that, that what you do, what you were able to publish shows that you've risen to the top of your field. So I know that's a difficult thing to work with, but this is another reason why oftentimes it's helpful to build up as much of your portfolio as you can so that you can maybe rely on some of these other categories so that the scholarly article can become like the icing on the cake that gets discussed in the final merits analysis.
Yeah, thank you.
What I'm hearing you say, Evan, is for certain fields like academia, there's a very direct correlation between what you're showing and how the officer is interpreting it. But for industry professionals, we have to rely on inference that show them specific data points where the officer sees this and can infer that indeed had an impact in the field, even though there is not a certain number like an impact factor that demonstrates it. Is that a fair summary statement to make?
Yeah, a lot of times, officers are basically handling what we refer to as circumstantial evidence. They're trying to connect the dots between what is there. And so, for example, if you show that you publish in a highly reputable journal and you show how difficult that is, how what the percentage is of acceptance into that, that can go a long way. So it's one of, I guess what I would say the challenge with these is there's not just a one size fits all approach. The way one attorney presents a case compared to another may not be wrong. Reasonable minds can differ on a lot of things in the legal field. So there are different approaches to take in certain ways, but the more you look at this from the perspective of how much do I think this is impressive, how much do people who know about my work, how much do they think this is impressive? And then start to bring that in more. So you can have people writing about this in your support letters as well. Or even, if there's something that connects the dots of maybe you wrote this article and that played a role in you getting invited to give a presentation at a prominent conference. That's evidence that will be very helpful for you to submit to show, yes, people are recognizing your faith. Whoever recognizes the work that you've done, you want to provide evidence of that. Unless it's your mom, we want to see it, right? So
Yeah.
you
Third
can
party,
even include something from your mom if you want, but I would
yeah.
suggest probably.
Third-party validations, trickle-down impact and recognition, all of those are good strategies to substantiate your claim that this is a major deal. We have one more. Oh my gosh, 12:15, right on the dot. Do we have time for one more question or no?
And we can use, I can go till 12:20 or so.
12:20.
That would, yeah, however you would like it. I'm having fun. So if you have more comments, the very good if it's 12:30 for me. So 15 more minutes.
I will just take it to 12:20 then. Pramit, you're the last question. Make it a good one.
Sounds good. Evan, nod, pause, and eye roll is an incredible framework. Thank you so much for that. Question about the framework. Is a full nod petition, like where you're reading a petition where it's all nods, the bare minimum for an approved EV1, or the average approved petition that you've seen has a few pauses that are here and there? Because I understand avoid all eye rolls, get as many nods as possible. Just question about the pauses, like, do I need to avoid all pauses? I know ideally I should, but like some insights on that would be great, Evan. Thank you so much.
Sure, it's a great question. I'll talk about this in two ways, because one aspect of this is avoiding an RFE. Because the more pauses you have, the more times an officer is saying, I'm not sure about this, the more likely they are to say, okay, let's include that in an RFE. They pull up a draft and they start pinpointing what they're going to do. The other challenge with this, and another reason why you want to avoid an RFE, is that once they've started adding a few things that they'd like to see, well, then they also start thinking, well, I don't want to issue more than one request for evidence, so I want to make sure I'm requesting all of it. And so they're going to go through your other evidence much more closely, and maybe something that they might not have taken issue with had these other issues not presented themselves, they would probably include that as well. And so one aspect of this is you're trying to avoid a very lengthy RFE, just discussing all these things. As far as the times when you get like the eye roll aspect, where they're just saying, this doesn't add up, that's where you've really got the officer starting to lean towards, this might be leaning towards more of a denial. And so you really want to avoid those aspects of this. But it's an interesting conversation to have, because you want to meet as many of the criteria as you can, but you also want to do it in a way which shows that you're presenting strong evidence to meet all of the criteria. And so for an example, would I prefer seeing a case where someone strongly meets 3 criteria and then has a really a lot of extra components to the final merits analysis, as opposed to someone that has a good chance of meeting 5 criteria and good supporting documentation? Well, I would rather have the first option, where they clearly meet the 3 and the evidence goes right to it, because you basically leave the officer to know where to go. What are you going to say about this when these meet the requirements? And so, but if you have other aspects that are kind of on the fence, it's kind of could go one way or the other. That's why I suggest perhaps move that to the final merits analysis, and that kind of puts you in a stronger position. Hopefully that answers your question, but I can follow up with.
Well, I was nodding the whole time. That answers my question.
So, the most engineering of minds will ask, what is the nod to yes ratio that we need to maintain in the 30 minutes that we have with the USCIS officer? What's the golden ratio?
Question. When I was back with the AEO, there were times that I would really grapple with some cases, and I would just be like, man, I'm really close on this particular issue, and then something would hit me, some piece of evidence. And sometimes I share this about a case I adjudicated that was for a fashion designer in Italy. And there was this one moment where I saw this piece of evidence and I said, wow, that is just a beautiful bag that she has designed. And then I realized, oh, that's Julia Roberts holding the bag, right? And so there's also this kind of PR element, or this kind of how it's conveyed element. And this is where I go back to that comment about you are trying to show the officer or impress them. How impressive is this? And there are times when I ask a client to give me a different photo of them obtaining an award because the photo I have just looks like it, I don't know, it just looks like it's not that prestigious of a thing. But then that same event, I'll get another photo of that, and I'll just say, okay, that was it. And so these are kind of, icing on the cake types of things. I don't suggest you just take the viewpoint of, well, how do we package this? How do we get a graphic designer to like make this look awesome? You don't need to go to those levels. But what I'm saying is there is an aspect of the documentation that you provide that can help your case and establish that, wow, this is something that sticks out to the audience. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, you're so correct. And it's always the little things that make the biggest difference. That yes, on paper, yes, you have gotten an award, you have the certificate, but if the certificate is shoddy, then the USCIS officer is making a spot decision, as we all do, and we have to navigate complex information. Evan, if I have 2 minutes of your time, I wanted to ask about your experience as an AAO officer. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that sounds good.
How many people over here understand what AAO officers are? With a show of hands, can you do this or this? Okay, so not everybody knows who an AAO officer is. I'm not USCIS pundit, so I'm gonna paraphrase it to the best of my knowledge. What I know, you apply for EB. USCIS denies it, you can appeal to the court or USCIS back to USCIS, and then there's somebody like Evan who's reopening that case and reassessing if the USCIS officer has given you a fair assessment or not. So an argument can be made that AO officers are more diligent in like really looking at, number one, your case, number two, the decision by USCIS, and then providing a third calibrated option. So to that end, I want to ask you, having read these AO cases that came through on your desk, what's the perception of a USCIS officer that you created? That, oh, these are the trends that I see in the way USCIS officers, these are the things that they are flagrant on, possibly, in applying the law. This is where they are fair. Can you give us some of those insights so that we can understand USCIS more effectively from your lens? I muted you because I was getting feedback. We can't hear. Evan, we cannot hear you. I muted you because I was getting feedback.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, what I would say is, there are these kind of trends that happen, but it kind of goes back to my comment earlier about these are, there's not a one size fits all strategy. So there are times when, for example, officers, I guess I'm going to discuss my main observations in some of the things that were not done as perfectly as could be done. So, for example, sometimes officers can hijack language from a support letter. For example, what I talked about those prospective contributions. Sometimes officers point to that language and they address it, but they didn't recognize that the entire rest of the letter was talking about the person's accolades and what they had accomplished already, right? And so sometimes it's almost like this cherry picking of evidence, not thoroughly reviewing things. But there also is this aspect of taking sustained acclaim to mean like you haven't shown you're famous. I mean, they won't use language like that, but I remember having a colleague of mine before I was about to give a presentation on EB1 cases, and he was talking to someone else about the case type, and he said, "Oh yeah, this is for the people that are at the very top of their field that basically are famous, like Michael Jordan, and, you know, these other people that everyone has heard of." And you know, sometimes officers feel that way. Sometimes people refer to this as the Einstein visa, right? Well, then some attorneys have discussed, well, we're not sure if Einstein would qualify for this with some of the ways that USCIS adjudicates this. So I think overall, my concern generally was that officers put kind of blinders on and said, no, you haven't met this, you haven't met this, you haven't met this. And they haven't taken the time to stop back and say, wait a minute, what does all of this demonstrate? What does it show, you know, the accomplishments this person has achieved? And is this at the level that we feel like meets these terms? In other words, to rephrase a little bit about the process here. So Congress created this this formulation where it says you have to show national or international sustained acclaim. And then USCIS created the regulations from that. And that's where these 10 criteria came from. And so that's why oftentimes I'm saying I want to remind the officers that, you know, the language says you know, this evidence goes towards a claim. So just don't disregard all of this. And so obviously just in general, I think that's one of my big takeaways is that sometimes officers got so involved in like the checkbox aspect that they either kind of disregarded the overarching part of this.
Yeah. Again, officers are just like us. We build our profiles with a checklist mindset. They are looking at our profiles with a checklist mindset. We should not be building our profiles with a checklist mindset. They should not be assessing it with a checklist mindset. So goes back to what we were talking about, Evan, that there are more things in common between us than what sets us apart. But I'll end with this. I always say the last man or the last woman standing should have something special that we reserve for them. So for all the 63 people, last people standing, any final words of advice that you're going to leave them with as they tackle EB1?
Yeah, that's what I would say is don't be discouraged by what you hear about whether, you know, things are changing in the EB1 landscape. Just be focused on, you know, what you've achieved and continue to network with others, continue to establish yourself as an expert in the field, and recognize that there is someone on the other side who is learning about your career. Help them learn about you, help them understand what it is that makes you so accomplished, and basically as you go through that process, don't give up. If you find that you file a petition, it's denied, it's not impossible to have a motion to reopen and have someone else look at your case, or file an appeal, or you know, spend 6 to 8 months more building up your portfolio and then applying again. I would just say it's a very difficult classification to meet, but I would just say do all that you can to move forward, and hopefully you can get that approval that you need.
Awesome. Jack, EB1's wherever we want to go, we go. Is that from the Pirates of the Caribbean?
It's from one of the movies. It's a quote.
Okay. All right. So folks, final takeaway, do not be discouraged, and everybody go watch Pirates of the Caribbean. And once you've done that, go and sneak into Evan's DMs on LinkedIn and tell him what a fantastic job he has done to promote EB1, clarify EB1, but also promote Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm going to watch that movie today as well. Thank you so much, Evan, for your generosity in your time. And folks who joined today, congratulations, one step forward in EB1. Keep going, and I'll see you in the next event.
Awesome. Thanks. Take care.